thrilled to see this room is about as full as I was hoping. So thank you very much, because we all know how on the last day of an event, the last session can be a bit of a ghost town. But I'm proud of you for hanging in there, and I think you're going to be paid some dividends in this panel that we're very much looking forward to. And also, thanks again, Ryan, for the just incredible work that you do at the Grains and Bioproducts Council. Exports have saved our bacon, so that's really important. Our last panel is, of course, centered around what's really captured a lot of the attention of the industry, as I mentioned yesterday, and that is 45Z. And we all know 45Z provides tremendous upside opportunity for clean fuel producers. It also comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility, a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of documentation and verification. And so we have a very high caliber panel of experts to help unpack some of that for us, help us not only understand what the opportunities are, but also how to overcome some of those challenges so you can maximize what you're doing if you're a biofuel producer that's looking to make the most of 45Z. We're going to start with a public official who I've really enjoyed getting to know and working with, a complete professional in terms of what she does and what her team does, and that's Kate Zook, and she's the acting director of USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy. A lot of tremendous work has come out of this office over the years, and Kate has absolutely carried that on, in fact, taken that to new levels in the time that she's served as acting. She's going to kick things off in terms of our panel by helping us understand what the final feedstock carbon intensity calculator looks like from the tremendous work USDA did, and then also the guidelines that they've put in place that we really need Treasury to incorporate for how farmers and biofuel producers can kind of track and verify the low carbon attributes of the bushels that they're delivering. So to start out with, please give a very warm welcome to Kate Zook of USDA.
Hi, folks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all so much for sticking around for this. Again, Kate Zook with USDA's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy. We are the team that created this regenerative biofuel feedstock rule. I'm going to walk through it with you all today. I will say I only have 15 minutes, and that is not a lot of time to go into detail about all the nitty-gritties of everything that went into this and all the folks that did all the modeling and the calculator and the rules and the verification and everything. So I'm going to give a pretty high-level overview. But we did offer a public webinar on this earlier this week that's going to be posted to our website. So if you want a deep dive on this, I encourage you to go check that out. You can also go on our website and sign up for our email list, and we will push out emails when there's updates and things you should know. So go and check that out for us. So I want to start by giving just a high-level overview of why we went down this road. And this isn't news to anybody in this room, but of course, I've seen a couple versions of this chart just over the past 24 hours. But this shows the carbon intensity of average U.S. corn, ethanol produced with average U.S. corn, compared to the carbon intensity of ethanol produced with corn, just as an example, from a county in Iowa using cover crops and no-till. And when this series of tax credits passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, we as policymakers looked at this, especially from USDA, and said, hey, you know, these tax credits reward fuel producers for producing fuel with a lower carbon intensity. The lower your carbon intensity, the more tax credit you serve to get. And if you look at the profile of that fuel, about half of it is coming from, the carbon intensity is coming from how you produce that feedstock. So how you produce the corn is hitting about 50% of the carbon intensity of the fuel. Of course, there's some emissions from converting to ethanol, some emissions from transportation, but if you are a policymaker and you can't touch that feedstock production, you've kind of failed, right? Like, if we're really going to do this, we need to do this. So we set down this road first with a tax credit called 40B. which many of you may recall was a tax credit that applied to the production of sustainable aviation fuel. And we got together with our interagency partners at Treasury and IRS and the Department of Energy and EPA and everybody, and we came up with this terrible pilot. It was like a USDA pilot, and you had to bundle practices. This is like trauma for people that are following this closely. It was if you're a farmer, you had to do no-till and cover crops and use enhanced efficiency fertilizer, and you got like a dartboard reduction on your carbon intensity, and no one liked it. And at that time, everyone kind of came together and said, okay, if we're going to do this, if we're going to open this door to accounting from the carbon intensity of feedstocks, we need a rule. We need some real rules that we can all stand on and feel good about that will allow this to happen. And I think the government thought at that time, oh, there's no way we can do this. And our team was like, no problem, we got you. And we very quickly were able to pull together an interim final rule that laid this out. We have some unique authorities related to creating environmental markets for farmers, which allowed us to do this. And so we laid out these rules of how you would implement practices, how the carbon intensity benefits of the grain would be quantified, how you trace it through the supply chain, how you third-party verify it. And we put out that interim final rule in January of last year. That then went out for public comment, and we got a lot of really good feedback from the public that allowed us to make some pretty significant improvements and changes in the final rule, which was just released in June. So some of you may be very intimately familiar with this and know a lot about it. Others of you may be hearing about this for the first time. So today I want to give kind of a high-level overview of the pieces of this. The official title of the rule is Technical Guidelines for the Production of Regenerative Agricultural Biofuel Feedstocks. Terrible title. Probably should have one focus group to make that shorter, but we didn't. So, and it covers the whole system, right? So how farmers do the practices, what those requirements are, how the accounting works, how that record keeping works, how things are passed through the supply chain. So it's a real piece of work. And I think maybe a good way to introduce it here is to talk about the changes that we made from the interim rule to the final rule. So here you can see that the covered crops in the interim rule were corn, soy, and sorghum. We were able to add spring canola to that list in the final rule, which was a good win. Most of the covered practices remain, so things like no-till, reduced-till, cover crops, nitrification inhibitors, those were all in the interim rule and lived on. If you're not familiar with the on-farm practices, kind of what you need to know here is these are practices that either reduce emissions or sequester carbon, right, that can be then counted towards the grain. The biggest change we made from the interim to the final rule on the practices was the interim rule required some nitrogen management practices that were fixed. So we had in there that you could split apply your nitrogen and avoid fall nitrogen application, and we had sort of made like an estimated reduction of nitrogen input that was associated with those practices. A lot of the feedback we got from farmers was, hey, we can manage our own nitrogen. We don't want you to tell us how to do it with these practices. Let us do our job and account for it accurately. So in the final rule, we changed to a system that's based on nitrogen use efficiency. And so the less nitrogen you put on, for the more yield a farmer produces, the better their carbon intensity score. So essentially there's an average nitrogen use efficiency, and the better the farmer does, the more carbon intensity benefits they're going to get. And so that really opened the door to a lot of additional practices that could be used on farm. We also added some additional flexibility. We allowed for the grazing of cover crops as a termination method. If folks aren't familiar with what a cover crop is, it's a crop that goes on when the field would otherwise be fallow over the winter that adds biomass and builds soil carbon. We also allowed for the application of manure. And we made a slew of other changes too. We beta tested and peer reviewed our calculator, USDA's feedstock carbon intensity calculator. We also moved to a new classification of tillage. So if a farmer says they're doing no-till or reduced-till within the calculator, there's a tool that they have to use to claim whether they were doing no-till or reduced-till. It used to be STIR in the interim rule, which is a tillage classification based on erosion. It's a classification system that's been around for a very long time within USDA. But a more accurate way to capture soil carbon benefits is not to look at erosion, but soil disturbance within the soil column. And so we developed T-DISC as a way to align with the rule a little better there. We also require nutrient management information from the farm now because of this nitrogen use efficiency calculator. We need to know how much was put on and what that yield was. And we moved from a farm scale reporting system to a field scale reporting system. And that is because we got a lot of feedback, especially from the ag community, that they wanted to be able to test a few of these practices on a portion of their farm and not have to dilute that carbon intensity coming from a few acres with the rest of their operation. They wanted to be able to just participate with some of their farm, and now they're able to do that. And we changed the mass balance to work in a dry weight so as to reduce the instance of gaming the system with moisture content. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with talking about what happens on the farm, and then we'll kind of work our way through the chain. So the official calculator that is used to calculate the farm scale carbon intensity is USDA's feedstock carbon intensity calculator. It reports out in CO2e per bushel, and it contains all the practices and crops with USDA's rule. So it is meant to work in tandem with USDA's rule. And the modeling that was done to inform that model, it all aligns with the requirements in the rule. So we're trying to sort of make sure that these things work together very, very well. And it was a whole team of experts, just a huge amount of work that went into creating that system that is credible and that we feel good about and we can stand on. So I won't get into that today, but if you're really curious about it, you can look at the manual on our website that talks about the methodology that underpins this. So let's walk through the calculator. So this is what it looks like. It's an Excel calculator that can be downloaded on our website. We are working on making a web version of this so that farmers won't have to download Excel to play around with it. And it's fairly simple. We tried to strike this balance of making it simple enough but accurate enough that it could give a good value of carbon intensity of that grain. So what you do is you walk through, you would put in the date, which crop you're growing, so you're producing corn, soy, sorghum, or spring canola, and how many management units you're modeling. So a management unit is a field or group of fields that all have the same set of practices. So if you have multiple fields that are all doing reduced till and cover crops, then those can be counted as one management unit. And then you're going to put in where you're farming, so your state and your county. And that information is drawing on all of these thousands and thousands of modeling runs that include your site-specific soil, your daily weather for the past 30 years, all of the information that is informing that specific region's ability to produce that grain at a certain carbon intensity. And you'll put in how big your management unit is. We're just going to say 100 acres here for simplicity. And then what your yield is in bushels per acre. And then we also ask for expected yield. And the reason we ask for expected yield is because it's a bound on actual yield. And the reason we do that is because in a really bad year, say like 2012, you could do everything right in terms of managing your nitrogen and get a terrible yield, and it's going to look like your carbon intensity is terrible because it looks like you put way too much nitrogen on for the yield you got out. So it'll hit that low bound in those years, and the higher upper bound is just mostly a check on user entry. That expected yield comes from your crop insurance. If farmers don't have crop insurance, they can use their average ARC county yield for that. And then you also put in your total synthetic nitrogen applied in pounds per acre. So those are all the required fields. And then we get into the management practices. So here, your options are, did you apply a cover crop? In this drop-down, you can also say whether that cover crop was grazed. In this example, we're going to go ahead and say, yes, we put a cover crop on. And then what your tillage practice was. So did you do no-till, or did you do reduced till, or none of the above? And again, here, to qualify for that tillage classification, you would go into TDISC, and TDISC is a similar calculator that's Excel. We're also creating a web tool of that. And farmers, for each of their passes in pre-plant, planting, post-plant harvest, have drop-downs of which equipment they used in those windows to capture all of the tillage that's happening in production of that crop. And so that will give you a numeric value that classifies you as reduced or no-till. So here we're going to say we ran the calculator, we classified as reduced till. You then are able to put on whether or not you used a nitrification inhibitor. That's a product that makes it the nitrogen loss less likely and more likely to be taken up by the crop. So here you would put the percentage of your synthetic N that's receiving an inhibitor. We're just going to, for simplicity today, say we didn't use that. And then you have the option to say whether or not you applied manure. So which species the manure came from, was it liquid, solid, what's the N content? And then you run the tool, and then it spits this out. So this is the result from this hypothetical example that may or may not be my family farm in Illinois. And you get a number here, which is your carbon intensity output. So here we have in grams CO2e per bushel, 3,183. And it breaks it down by the sources and sinks that make up that carbon intensity. And then it also compares you to a national average, estimated national average. Now that is, we don't say that here, but it is the GREET national average, right? So you're sort of comparing yourself to average corn. And you can see that by doing reduced till and cover crops in this example, reducing our carbon intensity by about 47%. So it is a pretty great way for those of you producing fuel to think about how you reduce the carbon intensity associated with that fuel. So after this report comes out, the farmer would either print screen or print out that biofuel feedstock sort of screenshot of the Excel that we just walked through. And they're going to combine that with some statements, the farm name, some information about where they are, and an attestation that they would fill out. And that biofuel feedstock report is what is then sold along with the grain to the first point of aggregation. So that is what gets passed along the supply chain. So now here, we're going to move on now from the farm. The rule covers then how that goes through the supply chain through to the refiner. And that is sort of the scope of USDA's rule, ends at the refiner. So let's talk a little bit about that supply chain. So here, for record keeping, let's talk a little bit about that. So farmers who participate are going to keep records, and those are specified in the rule, about the practices that they did that they're claiming on that calculator, right? So they would handle all the records associated with that. They would keep those on farm for 5 years. What's passed on, again, is that biofuel feedstock report and the quantity of grain at that CI that they're selling to the first point of aggregation. Now, the first point of aggregation could be an elevator. It could be the refiner, right? It could be somewhere in the middle. But that point, that first point, let's say it's an elevator, they would have a third-party verifier, and the requirements in the rule for who could be a verifier specified. They would come in every year and audit that first point of aggregation for, yes, we checked your mass balance, it looks correct. We checked your CIs for all of your feedstock reports coming in, they match up. And then that point would also audit a square root, a sample, which is a square root of the farms participating in that year. So that is how audit is handled. And then the grain, which is commingled, this is mass balance again, it's commingled and mixed along with the reports of the biofuel feedstock reports and the verification reports are then passed to the next point in the chain where they would be verified and they would be verified, et cetera. Now, Brian mentioned this is not like a super simple system, right, to comply with, but I think we, on our team, we're trying to walk this balance between simplicity and something that was acceptable to regulators like Treasury and IRS, right? So creating a system that we felt would work and be able to stand up to those sort of systems, but also one that could survive. So then, through that system, that mass balance system, you hit the refiner. That's where we stop, right? And that is where policy hits in. We obviously are all here to learn and talk about 45Z, and the context that we're doing this rule in is in the context of 45Z. But I do want to point out that USDA's rule does not say anything about 45Z. It doesn't say anything about policy at all. It is actually policy agnostic. And so it is meant to be taken up by any policy that wants to create a window for reduced feedstock carbon intensity, okay? That could be a state, that could be Corsia, that could be someone else. And so this is meant to sort of be the federal regulations for how this system can work. And although I don't know that we got it completely perfect the first time, this was something that we felt very strongly that had to be done. We had a lot of support for it within USDA, and we're very pleased that we were able to get it over the finish line, but we are not the whole way there yet. So let's talk about what happens with 45Z. So we know that in February, Treasury released their Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and in that notice, they said, once USDA has a final version of USDA FDCIC, and that's taken up by DOE and the Energy Department in their GREET model, we will issue additional guidance, and we anticipate that that is going to come out sometime in 2026, and apply to fuel produced in 25. So that is where we are. We're sort of awaiting that regulation that will make this all a reality. So there's 3 things that have to happen here to connect this to policy. 1, USDA had to finalize its rule. We did that, so you're welcome. That was our contribution. There's two additional things. Thank you, guys. I will say that it took a lot of support from folks in this room and in the industry and in agriculture to get that across the finish line. So the thanks is very much owed back to the folks in this room as well for all the support we got to do this. 2 additional things that have to happen here. 1, the Energy Department has to take the USDA FDCIC calculator into the GREET calculator because Congress in 45Z said the calculation has to come from GREET, right? So that has to happen. And then 3rd, Treasury has to cite USDA's rule within 45Z officially. So we have 7 CFR 2100, that is USDA's rule in the Code of Federal Regulations. Treasury needs to then cite that and say, yes, fuel producers who want to claim carbon intensity from this have to follow these regulations. If they do that, they can claim this credit. They can use the calculator. They can officially make it all work. So we are working very closely with our interagency partners to finalize these 2 additional steps. We know from the regulatory agenda, of course, that 45Z is aimed to be finalized in November of this year. That's kind of all I can share at this point. I think we're all kind of just pushing as hard as we can to make sure that this all happens so that folks in this room can start to test this out and get it going. And we're really pleased that, we're able to do this. This is a huge deal. It's a huge deal for agriculture. And if there's a way that we can pass that value down to the farm and allow the farmer to have some power in this market with their grain, that's an excellent opportunity. So thank you all so much. I think this was a good stopping point because right where I ended at GREET is right where Kari's going to pick up. That's so right. We'll all hand it to her. Thank you guys so much for having us.
The perfect segue. Well done. Well done. Thank you for setting the stage. I want to thank Christianson PLLP for creating the vision for how we were going to do this panel today and helping fill in the details for what topics we were going to cover and who would cover them. Delighted to have 2 of their partners with us today. First, as Kate said, you're going to hear from Kari Buttenhoff, who's a CPA and a partner with the firm. If you've done RIN compliance or LCFS compliance work, I think probably almost everyone in this room knows Kari, has worked with her, or someone on her team. And she's exactly what Kate said. She's going to talk about the GREET model itself, which is still sort of the basis of determining CI under 45Z, and then talk about qualifications for RECs and some of the certification requirements as well. So please welcome Kari.
Thank you. I'm not sure which of these mics is actually working, so I'll try and not have feedback. But 15 minutes is not a lot of time to cover the model. So I'm going first. I like to poll the audience. Who's seen and been in the model? Fantastic. Who has been in the background dependency model that you're not supposed to be in? Fantastic. Okay. I just like to see who I'm working with. So I'm not going to go through the details of exactly what the model looks like. It looks like a lot of you guys are already familiar with that. So we'll breeze through some of that stuff, not to bore you to death with things you already know, and we'll focus on the things that are changing with the 26 version versus the 25 version. So this is just a real quick bridging the models, right? A lot of us participate in California or a West Coast low-carbon GREET program, and so this just shows the differences with 45Z GREET versus like an LCFS GREET. You'll notice as you go down the table, all of the inputs are exactly the same, right? So if you're filling out your LCFS model, you basically have your 45Z model. The exception I would note is the EAC and RECs. So LCFS did not allow you to offset electricity with EACs or RECs, while the 45Z does. That is important if you're looking at things with your combined heat and power units, right? We've had some plants ask, should I just shut that down so I can offset my electricity and lower my nat gas? You don't want to do that if you're participating in a West Coast market, because those pathways are based on using that without any EAC offset, right? So be careful that you pay attention to that. The other piece is at the bottom there. Electricity region, if you haven't figured it out by now already, is based on your balancing authority. So if any of you are on the edges of those regions that are on the maps, be careful. It's not based on your physical plant location. It's based on the balancing authority. And then the natural gas national averages in the model are noted there. Please take note that the 941 BTU and the 1047 BTU are based on 32 degrees at 1 atmospheric pressure. We're going to go into why that's important in just a minute. Okay, co-products. Real quick, because I think there's still some confusion around the co-products in the model. For all of you that have seen the foreground of the model, there are not co-product inputs, right? So that's a big difference from LCFS to GREET. Please be aware that you are still getting a co-product credit in the background. So wrapped into your ethanol CI score, it does take into account national average on distillers and corn oil. So when you're looking at facility boundaries and things that you may or may not be able to carve out, whether it's for model purposes or PWA or whatever the case may be, co-products are considered in your CI score, and you can't remove them. So drying energy for co-products has to be included in your model, right? Any work you're doing on that has to be included in your PWA analysis, okay? Then, energy offset basics. This is not going to spend a lot of time here either. Hopefully, we've all become very familiar with the EACs and the REC rules. So again, there's no offsets currently available for natural gas. You can only offset your electricity and only up to the amount you're actually using at the plant. You can claim behind the meter usage. There's some special rules around that and some things that have changed around reporting. We'll go through that in a minute. And then there's those qualification tests, right? So the generation facility that you're buying EACs from can't be more than 36 months older than the year that your plant first produced a transportation fuel. So most people, transportation fuel under the rule is when you first delivered ethanol that was 50 kilograms or less based on the 45Z GREET. So most people are using that from the start of the credit 36 months back, right? So it can't be older than 2022. The generation facility that you buy from has to be producing wind, solar, or hydroelectric, and the energy has to be generated in the same calendar year as what you are offsetting, and you have to show retirement of RECs in a qualifying registry. Okay, so hopefully this looks familiar for everybody. This is the 2026 version of the model. The key thing I want to note, I'm not going to walk through every line, but that purple box, those inputs in the model are informational only. They do not affect the CI score. No matter what you put in there, it is not going to change your CI score. They are only for informational purposes. The rest of the ones above the purple box and the inputs below, down in the user selections and the pink down there, those all affect the CI score. Once you get all of your data entered, this is our 2026 GREET model results table. So this breaks down on the top your feedstock portion of the CI, your fuel portion of the CI, the transportation pieces, and our indirect effects. And then down below that, you now have multiple sets of results. So the yellow box there, you'll see, is for fuels produced in 2025. And then the green box is for fuels produced after December 31st of 2025. So we are going to use both of those and talk about why they are there in this next slide. So we're going to look at the 26 model updates. So first thing to be aware of, version 25 to 26, is that they changed the base model. Anyone that was in the background model, did you find that base model number in there? The year? Anybody? Base model year? Preston did. Anybody else? No? One of our clients was actually messing with that, and they're like, it says 24, we're doing 25, it has to be 25. You can't change it. It's in the dependency model, no changes in the background model, but they did update that. So it generally is done 1 year in arrears, right? So the base model year in the current release has been updated to 2025 revision 1, and that gained ethanol approximately 0.3 in CI score. You get 0.3 better, not counting the grid, right? So a lot of the baseline model updates was to the electricity grid. The 0.3 is, so if you were to completely offset your electricity, you might see like a 0.3 reduction in your CI score. The second major change was the ILUC removal, which I think we are all familiar with. It did remove just that one ILUC line, and it results in approximately 5 points per plant. That changes depending upon your yield and how efficient you are with your crop, right? So that could go slightly higher than 5, slightly lower, so it's right around that 5-point reduction. Then the energy reporting changes. So this is back to that informational section of the model. So they added a line for on-site behind-the-meter integrated. This is for your CHP units and steam usage and things like that, right? So now you have to report your CHP electricity as well. Again, that field is informational, so it doesn't do anything. You don't get any additional credit for using CHP, unfortunately. They just want to know how much electricity is coming from that so you can see a better mass balance of the facility, right? And then they also added with that an on-site behind-the-meter EAC line. This would be for non-integrated, so like a solar farm or a wind farm that's on-site and is behind the meter. Important thing to note there is that even if you have all of the rights and everything to the EACs and you're not sending them anywhere, you do still have to register that project with a registry, like the MRET system, and you have to generate and retire RECs for your on-site solar or wind project, okay? And then the last piece to point out in the model is the clarification in the user manual on natural gas conversions. So we talked to we talked to DOE prior to the 26 release and talked to them about doing volumetric conversions. So instead of taking an MMBTU with a heating value and making an assumption on what that heating value is and then adjusting it to a default, so using 2 assumptions, we asked if you could just use volume and then convert your volume to an energy factor based on the default. And they okayed that. And in 25, many of you, if any of you worked with me, we were saying 941 is our number, right? So if you remember back to one of my earlier slides, that 941 is at 32 degrees and 1 atmospheric pressure. So DOE put in that you can do this volumetric conversion. It is in the user manual now as an option. And they clarified that the conversion factor actually has to be at 60 degrees and 1 atmospheric pressure. So our new conversion factor is 890.402918. Yes, I would keep the decimals since they bothered to list them all in the user guide. But so instead of the 941, you're going from SCF to MMBTU at 890. So additional benefit. Okay. Now, model data inclusion. I don't know if anyone has thought this far yet, but wanted to get this out there as we are starting to approach calculating credits. So we all had the inventory. A lot of us had inventory talks, right? How do we handle the stuff we had in inventory? So at the end of 25, we all have inventory in our tanks that was likely in your 2025 model in modeling your CI score. So that 2025 inventory can still be claimed in 2026, but it does have to be claimed according to the production year in which it was created. So your 25 ending inventory will carry forward that CI score when you sell those gallons in 2026. Then in 26, if your calendar year, no issues, you run the 26 model, you use that 2026 CI line on the new model that I showed you. If you're a fiscal year end, you have some months in 25 and some in 26, and you can't take the ILUC removal until 2026. So what they have advised in the user manual is that you take the 26 version of the model, you run just your 2025 months data, and you use the 2025 line on that model for your 25 months. And then you rerun the model again with just the 2026 data, and you use the 2026 line of the model. So a fiscal year-end plant could have 3 lines on their 7218 form, 3 different CI scores with different amounts of gallons attributed to each of them. Okay? Be careful as you're running forward with this. All right. Shutdowns, that's the other piece. I've talked to some folks about this. We did get clarification from DOE as well that if your plant is shut down, you do not have to include energy, natural gas or electricity usage while the plant is shut down. I would not pick out individual days when you had minor outages, but if you have an extended spring or fall shutdown, you can, if you have the data, you can exclude that energy from the model. Nope. There we go. And then certification, I'm going to try and cruise because I don't want to cut Jamey out of time. Certification is not a requirement for non-SAF under the rule, right? The model or the market does require it for the most part. If you're monetizing and selling your credits, they're going to want to see a certification on it. The certification provides a substantiation safe harbor for the credit. That does not mean that if you get a certification that the IRS cannot audit you. It does not mean that if you hand them a certification from any verifier that you are safe and they're not going to look at the underlying data. It is your ticket that when they come knocking at your door, you say, great, I had a third-party certification, here's my support for the model, and you hand them our report instead of all of the data that goes behind it. Should they choose to audit further from there, they can. Hopefully, they won't. Okay? The certification statement gets attached to your tax return when you file it. And then just as a note from a conflict of interest standpoint for anyone who does LCFS stuff, we did clear 45Z is fully compatible. It's an examination level. It's based on LCFS accreditation, should be done in accordance with that. So it is clear for us to do both LCFS and 45Z, and huge efficiencies to do that, right? We're already reviewing an LCFS model and all of those inputs, and as we saw on the first slide, same data goes into your 45Z, so it makes the most sense to tie those together. All right. Certification preparation, things to be aware of, meter requirements. If you're getting a certification, you have to have calibration of all of the meters of the data that you're using to prep the model. It's only a requirement in the certification, so should you just file the return and not have it certified? You don't have to have that. But it is a certification requirement, and calibrations have to be done within the last year. And then just a few notes on qualified sales and questions that we've had. It has to meet transportation fuel specs. They did write in a denatured and an undenatured spec, right? So it doesn't have to be denatured in order to claim it as a qualifying sale. The denatured gallons should be in line with ASTM specs. So if you're doing 85, you can still claim those gallons, but you should back the denaturant down at least to the maximum of the ASTM spec, which is 5%. And qualified sales gallons will not match the production number in the GREET model. They should not ever. The GREET model is undenatured, and your qualified sales are denatured ethanol. So immediate question we get from whether it's brokers or underwriters or whoever is looking at the reports, right? Those numbers will never match. Climate Smart Ag and the tie-in, most of this Kate's already covered, so we know what we need next in order to tie that in. I also had to verify the supply chain. This was according to ISCC, follows exactly what Kate covered, so we won't go through that. And then just timing considerations. So certification statements, again, they have to be attached to your tax return. In order to monetize it, you have to file it on the first tax return, right? Once you amend, then any additional 45Z credit on an amendment can only be used internally as a pass-through. It cannot be monetized any longer. We highly suggest interim reviews. If you want to try and stay on a timeline, on your normal K1 timeline for your farmers and stuff, right, then we want to be doing interim reviews to make sure we can meet that. We can't process the entire industry in 2.5 months, so talk to us early. And then just a note, Climate Smart Ag, of course, requires its own verification that is separate from the 45Z. So if you are going to incorporate regenerative ag, I need to update that slide. If you're going to incorporate that, then leave even extra time, right? Because the farmers have to be audited, the supply chain has to be audited, and the ethanol plant has to be audited just from that perspective. So we need more time or plan on extensions, right? Okay. That's what I've got. Hopefully I didn't cut you too short, Jamey.
Great job, Kari. Thank you very much. Now to sort of tie a bow around all of this and talk about overall compliance opportunities for you as a biofuel producer, overall compliance challenges perhaps, and how to overcome those is Jamey Cline, another partner with Christianson, who really helped create the vision for this panel. So please welcome Jamey.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be on the last panel and to be the last speaker as well. So we'll see how we can get this moving and move forward. But thank you for laying the groundwork, everyone. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. We're going to, as they said, back out just a little bit and talk about a few of the challenges we've seen in various parts of that due diligence process in this last initial year as we move forward. Now, as an economist, I look at things and I say, as a way to think about 45Z, I'm looking for some structure. Let's see. As you've seen around your plant, everything we're doing right now has a lot of uncertainty and takes a lot of time. Now, back in graduate school, they would have called that transaction cost economics. Has anybody ever heard of that before? It's one of those archaic things in textbooks you read about, right? Tax credits are very specialized, and specialization requires increased coordination, which can take a lot of time and is costly. I can't even imagine how much time each of you have spent, so I don't want you to think about how many hours you spent on 45Z. And this is just one program that your group is working with at your plant. There's, a new LCFS program it seems like every year you're working with as well. And each of these programs, as one of the breakouts mentioned yesterday, each program has different requirements also. So with different markets comes uncertainty, and this is exacerbated by the fact we don't have a final rule for 45Z and have sought interpretation for very complex regulations since they were released. The industry is having to comply with a new regulation that doesn't have all the rules down yet on paper, nor are they fully understood. In fact, because the market was being developed in real time, pricing and other benefits had to be developed. The existence and locations of brokers, buyers, and sellers had to be established, as well as the due diligence process. The industry had to figure out how to bring them all together. There's also some penalties for noncompliance as we continue to go through the tax years moving forward. One of the biggest changes that we've worked with regards to 45Z and any of the IRA-related programs and then continued in the OBBB was the usage of prevailing wage and apprenticeship. This is very important because, as you well know, this is your 5X multiplier. There's extensive rules and due diligence requirements around prevailing wage as well. And the key piece to me is coming up with the resources. We work with several plants who have actually brought on new staff to work with prevailing wage. How easy is it to hire new and experienced people in prevailing wage in the rural areas where your plants are? They're everywhere, aren't they? Just available, right? There's just not a lot of extra people, and the people you already had at the plant didn't have a lot of extra time either. In addition, if your plant's undertaking a large project or expansion, your team will be managing and analyzing a large volume of data, matching numerous work orders to projects, evaluating if they're in the qualified facility, decide if they're maintenance, repair, and all of the other details that they need to get from both operations, maintenance, working with contractors, and subs as well. Now, some of the larger projects might trigger apprenticeship, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Many types of labor we use every day in the plant. That's not even categorized in the SAM.gov website. So your teams have been requesting wage determinations as well. This can take time. The regulation says DOL has 30 days to reply to your request. We've been seeing some up to 6 months. So we would encourage direct contact to your DOL representative. We've seen that lower response time substantially. Lastly, there's a lot of other areas that take time. As Kari broke down, each of the pieces of due diligence takes time, and there's a time lag and analysis of information available. In fact, we still have teams working on some plants prevailing wage work back from 2025. So with prevailing wage, there's a lot of complexity. This just adds another layer of analysis around maintenance, repair, alteration, and construction projects, as well as the evaluation projects with your subs. So it's something else your staff must do each and every day. And we just wanted to mention you can't start too early in your process. Start early, start often, work your SOPs, and manage that information. Key will be how your team and your CPA define your qualified facility. Kari mentioned that a little bit as well, because that's the boundaries of repair, maintenance, and alteration around which projects require prevailing wage. Also, regarding capital projects, if you're fabbing or have skids made off-site, they might also require prevailing wage, and that would be prevailing wage of the plant. So check into that as well. As the credits get larger, Buyer's Council might increase the requirements in your tax memo. Your tax year end and coordinating that with your buyer is also important for the timing of the transaction. The other piece, having clients disclose and provide support that shows sales or qualified sales, may also include confidential information, so that's difficult to work with. But there may be an opportunity to develop a relationship with your buyer and sell a strip or credits over multiple years where the conditions and requirements are known. If you can get that relationship with your buyer, which is somewhat difficult, that's going to be helpful. And as Kate said, as we've seen these graphs here way too often, this is one of the other graphs with regards to breaking down the CI from corn production and ethanol. And we see corn production being over 50% of that. How these emission table rates are different for each plant and are based on facility allocations and yields. But needless to say, this is a way to monetize the efficiency gains made by production ag. Low CI feedstocks must also be verified, and the supply chain is still developing. I wanted to briefly mention, and thanks for Preston for helping put this together, this is just some examples that provide the CI impact of various cultural practices. It's really interesting to look at. Ranging from no-till, lower CIs by over 8 points, to reduced in-application with much more modest impact. We have our new model this week, so your mileage may vary, so take a look at that and see what that'll do for your plant. So with regards to adopting a regenerative ag project, we each, used to be, I could walk into a plant back when they were 15 or 50 million gallons, and I could literally do the tour within a plant. Your plant's changed a little bit, hasn't it? Everybody's situation is different today. And there are certain plants where the program fits extremely well and has low barriers to entry. Plants that had demonstration projects last year, they might be part of networks where they manage that information. They might have experience with data management, access to really good data sets at the farm level, and they might have access to some really good trained farmers as well. So that's going to be something we're going to be developing in this industry. In addition, having the people just to manage the resources and to manage the process is critical, because as we talked about earlier, your people are limited at the plant. Certain plants are also in a better position to maximize 45Z. If they have a smaller amount or a smaller number of CI they need to cut to get to that next level or tier, or bucket of credit, that enables them to get there that much quicker. If there's less farmers to coordinate, have a smaller number of farmers that deliver to your plant, that also lowers coordination costs. We've talked to some plants that have worked with co-ops that are going to, essentially they're outsourcing that to the co-op or the elevator, making essentially those resources available. That may lower your transaction cost as well. Some of our destination plants are going to be able to take full rail cars, unit trains of this as well. That'll be a big help as well also. One of the challenges that we have here, where RNG is available and easy to work with the plant, however, we don't have a CI score here until the next model comes out for RNG, so please take that into account. I only wanted to show this chart to quickly mention the goal is to achieve the next tier of credit. So if you decide to pull that lever, what are the possibilities and how easy can you get there? I ran a couple of quick scenarios with mass balance, just a generic scenario, 100 million gallon plant, 3 gallons per bushel. So your situation may be different. This scenario assumes a starting point where the plant just qualified for the 10-cent tier last year, so right in that, just under 47.5. And this year, after the removal of ILUC, they're just under that 42.5 for the 20-cent bucket. So again, this assumes a weighted average approach to low CI feedstock and a baseline CI for additional corn. So depending on where your plant starts, it may be easier or harder to enable your production to reach that next tier of credit and achieve additional 45Z tax credits. This plant starting at 42.4 example only achieves the next level of credit under 37.5 with approximately 20 million bushel of corn, assuming 10 points each of CI savings. Now the other corn that was included, it was included just at the base level. So if you change that example up a little bit, this slide assumes the exact same scenario except starts 2.4 points lower at 40. So with only a 2.4 point CI lower starting point, the potential benefit is much larger, and it is achieved by sourcing less CI bushels. So needless to say, that lowers your cost as well. Bottom line, where you start matters. This may be a great lever to pull to get you the few points you need in order to get to that next bucket. Again, this is just a gross monetary benefit, so please take away your costs and your situation as well. After cost, the complete supply chain will need to figure out the division of revenue created. So that's going to be a very interesting watch from an economic standpoint. Now, on the other hand, we have some plants that will have a little higher barriers to implementation, where utilizing a regenerative ag program will be a little bit more difficult. Some plants have a larger CI change, like is in the example, to achieve the next tier. They might buy the majority of their feedstock through multiple elevators. Some of these commercials might have a program, they might not, and accessing information from those commercials might be difficult also. We've had commodity markets that have been efficient for generations, and this is something that we'll have to figure out how to handle in that market. Also, where RNG is locally or readily available in quantities large enough to impact CI and your plant's able to use RNG, that may be a good way to lower CI to partner with a regenerative ag program as well. Bottom line, there's risk to creating a program which must be evaluated to see if the premium created will provide enough value to cover the costs of the program and up and down the supply chain. Lastly, on the transfer market, there's definitely a few costs during that sales process as well. We have multiple parties performing due diligence, and as we move into year 2, the credit amounts are higher. I hope some of you are able to use the same buyer as you had last year, but almost everybody we've talked to is going to a different buyer. Brokers will be key in managing and overcoming that gap and figuring out who you're working with regards to a buyer. If your plant's able to work with the same buyer, there could be efficiencies and more understood expectations. And again, here's another one of those things. Due diligence takes time, right? As we come to that September 15th deadline, time is becoming precious. But even with your different year ends, there's still a lot of things that take additional time, so start early. There's definitely some challenges, as we've discussed, in entering this market, but the tax credits received can also be very large. We've got a wonderful opportunity in front of us. We hope to receive additional guidance from the IRS with the final rule later this year. After the industry and supply chain gain more experience, this will help offset some of our standards and expectations and costs we're seeing as well. Lastly, we have management tools such as certification that Kari talked about to manage some of that risk as well. Overall, the 45Z and regenerative ag can enhance profitability through tax incentives, operational improvements, and long-term value creation, and must be thoughtfully developed in order to decrease transaction costs where possible. Okay, thanks again.
Very well done, Jamey. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kari. Thank you, Kate. It's now time for questions, so please make your way to the microphones and state your name and who you're with, and go ahead and ask your questions.
Excuse me. Hey, thank you for your information here. Name's Todd Brown. I'm a farmer and an ethanol plant board member. And my question or comment is going to be to Kate. I wanted to use the TDIS calculator. I'm struggling with it. I really think farmers are going to want an easy version of that they can do at home, see where they're at, play with it, see what they can do to change it. I think this will be very valuable. And then another thing is we're going to be upon harvest pretty quick, and if I know anything about it, we need to direct farmers to not do deep tillage this fall to wreck 27's crop. And so we need this information very fast. And then maybe my question for you is, you had 3 boxes that need to be checked. You've done 1. Would it be safe to say that the farming practices, the tillage practices, maybe are set and how they get valued might be getting changed? Or is that not a fair assessment that it's all up for grabs going forward?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, the TDIS calculator is public. It's available. It is what is final today, and it is in relation to the final rule. So there may be updates to that in the future, but that is what you should be referring to as of now for sure. I know it's a little clunky. Not everyone is great at downloading Excel, working with that, looking at the different windows. We are working on making a web version of that, which should make it much easier for farmers, especially, to play around with it on their browser without having to download Excel. I'm hopeful that that'll come out soon, maybe in the next couple of weeks, so you can start using it. And I know decisions are being made now, right? And your point is very relevant. So we do have an email address on our TDIS website to email questions, and I think you've done that. Please do send questions. That helps us improve the tool. It helps us improve the whole system. So yeah, I would say go ahead and play with it. You can make decisions based on it today. We don't have full control, to your point, of how things change in the future, but that is what we have now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Kate, over here. Mark Heckman, Southeast Iowa farmer, but also work in the industry, been in the industry for quite a while. In regards to farmer attestations and supporting documents, I guess if you can expand a little bit about that, what the farmers are going to need to have or where that source of truth is going to be. And then also, second question is, do you see the USDA as being a potential third-party verifier or somebody that is playing the role, whether it be FSA or as the farmers go and sign up for programs in that? So. Yeah,
those are great questions. In terms of the attestation, it's a list of things that the farmer is saying, yes, I entered things correctly to the best of my knowledge. Yes, I have records to demonstrate in accordance with a rule that I did do those things. Yes, I have management control of the operation. It's things like that. There is also an attestation in there that says that if you're claiming no-till, that you no-till for 4 out of every 5 years. Now, granted, it's a 1-year tax credit, so we take that with a grain of salt, but it's meant to align with the modeling for no-till, which is 4 out of 5 years in the future. And there's also an attestation that says, I'm not going to sell this carbon intensity benefit somewhere else in addition to with my grain that's going to fuel. And the reason that that's in there is because we don't want to double count that carbon intensity in 2 different markets, right? And it's under penalty of perjury. That is what Treasury and IRS want to see. And so that's what will be signed and then passed along with the result from the feedstock report. So that's that. I'm blanking now on what your second question was. You remind me.
So as a farmer, we want to make sure this program I'm going to sign anything, right? I just want to make sure, what's the teeth in that, or at least from a supporting
Sure.
document of
Sure.
who's checking
Who's the
that?
verifier? That's right. Okay.
Who's the
These
verifier?
guys. Yeah. Yeah. So we did actually. It's interesting that you asked about USDA serving as a verifier. We did look into our authorities around that when we were drafting the interim rule, and we did a pretty thorough scrub within the department of whether or not USDA could serve that role, and we decided we don't have the authority to serve that role. And so what will happen is at that first point of aggregation, so wherever you're selling your grain with your feedstock report, they'll have a third-party verifier come, and at that point, they will verify the feedstock report, the mass balance, the quantity in and out, the carbon intensities, and they'll verify a sample of the participating farms. And so they would come to a sample of those farms, say, let me see your records, let's make sure they line up for the things you said you did, and that then, once they're all good, produces a certificate. That certificate goes along with those CIs and that grain to the next point in the chain.
Thank you. Thank you for
You
the
got
work.
it. Absolutely.
Greg Amundsen, Gilby, North Dakota, and North Dakota Corn here. So I bring a little different aspect. We have nothing to do with the ethanol side altogether. But kind of to piggyback on everyone else, when you talk about the CI score, that's all great and all. But since more of the farmer side, you're not going to have much farmer buy-in without an existing mechanism for an incentive. Mm-hmm. And from what we've talked about this a lot in our board meetings and everything, is what farmers worry about is any premium. Let's say there's a premium for doing all this stuff. Any premium can also turn into a discount, and that's what people are worried about. It's not the premium; it's the discount. So this is all great, everything, and going along with all this, but where's the farmer incentive to go along with this and to be part of it? Where's the payback, I guess? Is it, that's one thing that seems to be missing in this whole conversation. Is I know you guys are the ethanol producers, but us as the farmer side, we have to work together on this. And from the way we're seeing all this kind of set up and the way it's going and the big huge numbers we're seeing the disconnect there. Where we're just not seeing the payback. So I'm just curious what you want to address that a little bit, what your thoughts were on that.
Do either of you guys want to take that? From our rule can't dictate how the market is going to reward the participating farmers, right? We created the structure for the system to work. In this case, there's a tax credit that is going to provide that value to the fuel producer, and you're right, how that value passes down to the farmer is kind of a question, right? And I'm anecdotally hearing from different fuel producers how they're planning to pass that on and what percentage they're planning to pass on. But I think that's a question, and it's gonna shake out over the next couple of years of how that value traces down. And these folks did a really good job about showing the rounding points within 45Z and the decisions around making those points. And I think there's going to be this market where farmers are going to say, hi, I've run this report. Here's my CI. Would you like to buy it? And the fuel producers are going to have to say, I need to get to this level within 45Z in terms of reduced CI of my fuel. How much grain at which CIs do I need to source to get to those points? So it is a market that is going to have to happen that's new.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. But also, one thing we need to consider is a situation where it's going to be a way uneven playing field, where they're going to say, well, I don't want that from 10 miles away because this guy 45 miles away has got a better CI score. So you're going to really shift dynamics a lot and perception. So it has to be navigated very carefully too. So thank you.
Brad Justice with Richards Lake. Thank you. This has been very informative. One comment and then one question. On the T-Disc piece, we have a couple clients that are already building digital versions of that, and they're already trying to integrate that into a variable rate application. So you'd put your stuff in there, and you guys get out of that reduced till to no-till or kind of qualify yourself. So there's a lot of folks technology on solutions. And on price, we do see Marquis with basically 40% of the value bid. E-Energy's got a bid. ADM came out with a bid this week on a lot of grain. So we are starting to see some indication of what the payments might look to farmers. But my question is on the provisional emissions rate pathway. This FDCIC and the ability to operate in feedstocks is a place to drive innovation in agriculture, right? Whether that's around NUE, whether it's around some of these digital tools. and I know this is a tricky question, but how is the provisional emissions rate pathway? Do we think that's going to be something that opens up and really lets us drive innovation, especially on the feedstock piece of this?
It's a great question for my colleagues at Treasury. Yeah, I don't know that I can comment on the pure pathway at this point. I think we've gotten as far as we've gotten today, and we'll kind of see what comes next and what doors it might open. I think that's sort of an open question. I'll also say that, although we have a final rule now, that doesn't mean it's never going to change again. We are already thinking about what other feedstocks, what other practices, what improvements can we make. So I think there's going to be multiple opportunities here to expand on what's been done. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have.
Do you guys want to weigh in on
the peer
provisional emissions rate or anything?
There's not a lot out there on it yet. I mean, until it opens up and we're able to move something and actually see how it's working, it's hard to say. I know there's a lot of assumptions. Right now in the background of the model, it's set up as a weighted average. Maybe there's some room for that to change when we see the final. I don't know. If it was set up as its own pathway, right, it would drive a lot more direct revenue, right, and for those particular gallons that used low CI crop. Right now, the model's not set that way, unfortunately, so we would have to see a major change when the next version comes out, hopefully this fall, but...
I would just add, I think we've all had some things we'd like to alter relative to the Treasury rule, particularly about the provisional emissions rate and opportunities that may surround that. And I think maybe we just all have to keep working together and kind of persuading, if that's the right word, Treasury to work with us. I do appreciate the iterations that USDA has already made and Kate's commitment that they'll continue to iterate. I think that's so critically important, right, for the modeling overall to make sure it reflects real-world activities. And so just wanted to say thank you for reiterating that. Absolutely.
Chad Freese, ethanol producer. On the verification side, I guess when you start to bring regenerative ag in, LCFS markets came around, we had to try and scramble to get verification. 45Z, we had to kind of figure that out. When we bring all the production into this verification system, and we're doing first point, and we've got the co-op that's bringing bushels into the ethanol plant, farmers that are bringing bushels into the ethanol plant. First off, we had the question already, how do we monetize that? But then second, how do we verify it? And then if we do get it and we grind it through, because that corn goes through the plant, and then we have a problem with verification on the grain side, the impacts that can have at the ethanol facility and their 45Z, their tracking, all of those things. Just general thoughts about all of this additional verification and how solid is that, and what's the pushback if all of a sudden we said, all of our corn was X and some of it misses, and that could move us a tier. Mm-hmm. The defaults are really inflated versus what's really happening on the acre. Is there any way we can bring those defaults down and let us work with a real number right up front? I guess that would make the ethanol producer a lot more comfortable and give us some time to get verification on the farms.
Mm-hmm. No, those are great questions too. On the defaults, I might start there. I think going through this exercise of creating USDA FDCIC taught us a lot about what is happening out there in reality in agriculture and how those crops are being produced today. And there's a couple of areas that we've already brought up with our friends at the Energy Department to say, hey, could we possibly just revise some of these defaults to make them lower? So that is one of the things that's certainly on my radar. In terms of the verification, you're right, there's always room for error, right? But I think the system that we created, which is it's independently for third-party verified every year at every point in the chain where it's handed off, right, where you sell the grain or the processed product. I know it's more complicated when we're talking about soy and crush and all that. You guys are not worried about that as much. But that is, an attempt to reduce the risk of there being an issue as that mass balance happens through the chain by the time it gets to the refiner when it's, again, third-party verified. So there is a lot of verification in the system as a check on making sure that there aren't issues early in the chain, right? So that is why we structured it that way. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
The sooner that you can do that too, right? So 2026 crop, let's just not worry about the back years because that's harder, right? But going forward as this is active, right, we can start auditing the crop as soon as the harvest is complete, right? That's the completion of the year. And so then we start auditing. So as soon as the farmers have yields and stuff finalized, we can be auditing. Will there be room for that in Jan, Feb, March or so before we get into planting and stuff? Maybe. And if you can get that stuff, right, the early steps of the supply chain audited that early, then you know everything you're grinding for 26 is going to be good, right? You know that your scores are good down at that base level. So the sooner you can get those audits moving, the more you'll know if your data is accurate. If that gets delayed well into summer or fall where you're coming up on the actual tax filing where you're going to use it, that's where you have those questions where it's going to be more iffy, right? So the sooner we can get through that crop, right, so 26 crop, and you'll start claiming it for grinding in January of 27 most likely. That gives you a lot of time to get that done and get comfortable with those lower people on the supply chain, right, with the farmers and making sure their data's good.
Brian and Katie, Mark Heckman with Edenic. Again, Brian, since you brought up the provision emissions ratings, kernel fiber, a lot of these plants are in that market. And Katie mentioned that the same inputs are used for both models. And so in that spirit, as we have the ability to begin and petition for these provisional emission ratings, how hard do you see it that corn kernel fiber could be part of that? I've seen some calculations that it could amount to substantial numbers when you tier in. You take a slightly increased level of CI for your base starch ethanol, but the kernel fiber then drops down for all the farm inputs as a point of origin being the fermentation tanks. How is that even on the radar of anybody, or how do we get that elevated?
I think they're waiting for the PER process to open up to see if they're going to accept it, right? There's still a lot of questions around that too. My immediate questions if we do get it opened up is, are we following fiber or are we following cellulosic, right? So is it going to follow California testing methods that will give you 3 to 5% of your production at that rate, or is it going to follow EPA cellulosic methods that are going to give you 1%? Right, of your production at that amount. So I think we're all just waiting for the PER process to see once someone's got to submit something in and get it started and see where we're at and if they accept it. But those are some of the initial questions that I would have as that gets written in, right? And what are they going to follow? I think EPA has been noted in some of it that they've been consulting EPA, so it's possible they would only take cellulosic if they do consider it, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Anything we need to do to prepare until then?
There's some people getting PER process documents put together, right, and getting all of that ready for submission for when it opens. That's about what we can do at this point, I think. I don't know, Brian, if you guys are working on anything else related to that.
I think you've covered that, Kari, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our panel on this Friday late morning? Yes.
I'll make one, it's not a question, but a call out. October 6th, the Soil Carbon Solutions Center at CSU hosts a modeling workshop. So if you want to get really into the nerdy weeds of this and meet Steve Ogle and some of the folks that really use the carbon piece of this, the feedstock part, there is a show that will be in Fort Collins then, and all of those modeling wizards will be there. So just a call out to folks if you have more interest in how they run those models and come up with the soil carbon scores. They have an annual meeting there. Not a question, just a comment.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I'm sure these guys will stick around. Let's give them a big hand of applause for all the work they put into this. Thank you, so much for being part of this and helping sort of explore the opportunities and challenges, and safe travels to you. And I think, Ashley, are you going to come up and kind of close us out? Maybe we'll just sit here and wait for you.
I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming this year. It's been a great event. I hope you all enjoyed it. And thank you again for staying to the bitter end. We had some great speakers this morning, and so I'm happy that you didn't miss out on those. Please consider joining us next year. We're back in Sioux Falls for the annual conference, August 25th through 27th, 2027. We'd love to see you there. Otherwise, I will be around if you have any questions, comments, anything you need to say to me, or the ACE staff will be around for a little bit here. Otherwise, reach out to us anytime. We're happy to help. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I hope that was okay.
It was great.
I kind of fumbled the prayer question because we can't really answer it. So.
Thanks.
Yeah.
See the ocean there in your eyes in slow motion. We see the sunrise. We are in a zone.